So let's go ahead and show how to define the loop. We're going to start with a while loop, such as this, while. You type the word while, and then you put your parentheses for your condition, and then your brackets. And basically, anything in your brackets right here will be run as long as this condition is true. And this condition is true, or this condition is checked, better to say. This condition is checked at the beginning of the loop, the code is ran, and then it's checked again. And if it's still true, the code continues to run. So the best way I can say this is, let's go ahead and do it like this. We're going to say int run equals 10, okay? And then we're going to basically say cout run end line, okay? And then we'll say run equals run minus 1, okay? And in this loop, for the condition, we're going to say while run is greater than or equal to 0. Remember, we discussed this operator. That means greater than or equal to 0, okay? So moving on, basically this is going to say while this is true, do this. And if you look at the end of our code, basically we're setting run equal to run minus 1. So the first time the code runs, run equals to 10, and then the next time it equals to 9 until it gets to 0, and then it should quit running. So let's run it real quick. And as you can see, it did it real quick, but it printed off because we're outputting it 10, 9, all the way down to 0. And that's basically what we wanted it to do. One thing I want to discuss that maybe we haven't discussed earlier in the arithmetic, because there really is a lot of arithmetic things you can do in C++ that are very interesting. And one of them I want to show you now while we can use it is this. When we say run equals run minus 1, another way in C++ that we can do that is say, it's actually easier, less code to write, is say run equals minus 1. And what that does is that basically means run equals run minus 1. And it would be the same thing if you said run equals plus 1. Let's just run it real quick and you'll see that we get the same result. You're just going to have to visualize, okay, so it's wrong right there. I was wrong about that. So maybe it's minus equals. I believe it's minus equals 1. Yes, that's right. So I had it backwards. Sorry about that. So this right here, this minus equals, or if you did plus equals, is the same thing as saying run equals run minus 1. So if we do that, obviously we're going to get the same thing as run equals run minus 1, right? Now the one thing that's dangerous about loops is that you can get caught in an infinite loop. Okay, so that being said, if we did, run plus equals 1, that's the same thing as saying run equals run plus 1. Obviously, the variable will never get to 0, and this thing will be caught in an infinite loop. And we're going to go ahead and hit build and run so you can see what happens when you get in this situation. And as you can see on screen, the number is just adding up very quickly. You can see how fast the processor is clicking through these numbers and going through this loop. I mean, it's almost instantaneous. We'll be at 100,000. This code will be ran 100,000 right about now. You can see we've already ran this code over 100,000 times. And if you get caught in this, one thing that I would recommend doing is just pushing Control-C on Windows, and that shuts it down. So if you get caught in an infinite loop on Windows, hit Control-C. But I just kind of wanted to show you what that was. And so yeah, infinite loop, hit Control-C and get out of it. And that's one thing you need to watch for, when you're doing this, is to make sure you you get your code right and that you think about it in your head first before you run it so that you don't get caught in one of those infinite loops and have your computer accidentally crash. So there's the difference between minus equals and plus equals. You see how much different the code is. Rather than getting in an infinite loop, it quits because this statement is no longer true once run is less than 1. So once it gets to -1, it doesn't run anymore and it goes ahead and hits return 0. So that is a while loop, okay? So now I want to introduce a do while loop. And a do while loop basically says, do this, anything in here, and then it checks the condition at the end while run is greater than or equal to 0, okay? And then you put a semicolon. So it's a little bit different syntax. You say do, and then your brackets, and then while, your condition, and then a semicolon. So let's see what the difference is between this, having your condition checked at the end of the code rather than the beginning. Well, the difference is this. If we set run equal to -5, obviously it's not greater than or equal to 0. But the difference is that this code will always run at least once. So I'll show you what I mean. Even though run is less than 0, when we run this, the code will still get ran once and it shows it's -5. Okay? So that's the difference between a while and a do while. But you can still have the same, you say, well, when would I use that? Well, when we get into more practical examples, you'll see these do while and while loops are used interchangeably depending on the situation. If you want your code to run at least once no matter what, then obviously a do while is more appropriate than a while loop. But just to kind of show you that we can still get the same result out of this code as a while loop, we're going to go ahead and set run equal to 10, leave our condition as the same, and then say run minus equals 1. And we should get the same result as before, 10 all the way down through 0.
The way a for loops works, you're going to go ahead and set it up the same. You're going to say for your condition and then the brackets, just as you would a while loop or an if statement. You just proceed it, before the condition is where you write for. So the confusing part to many people is the condition inside the for loop and how it works. And I'm going to go ahead and explain it to y'all, but first I'm going to set up a variable. We'll call it value, and we'll say equal. Actually, the way we're going to do it is, we'll say value equals 0. Okay, we'll just set value equal to 0. And then here in the for loop, we're going to declare an integer called index, and we're going to set it equal to 0. Okay, and then put a semicolon. Now just stick with me for a second, because I know right now you're thinking, what? That right there, you're declaring something in a condition. Well, this is not the whole condition. This is only 1/3 of the condition. So after you declare your variable int index equals to 0, we're going to say index less than 10, and then we'll say index plus plus. Now I want you to sit here and breathe this in for a second, because I know it looks complicated, especially if this is your first time ever looking at a for loop. So basically what we're doing in this for loop, we're declaring index as a variable and setting it equal to 0, okay? And then we're saying this right here is basically our condition, is what I would call the condition aside from these other two. This middle part says do this while loop as long as index is less than 10. And then this third part is what I like to call the incremental part of the for loop. This is how much you want to increment each time the loop runs the variable that you're testing, index. And I mentioned earlier in the last tutorial, I believe, that minus equals was the same thing as saying index equals index minus 1. Well, in C++, index plus plus is the same thing as saying index equals index plus 1. So easier way to write that is to just say index plus plus. And I know we did, something like index minus equals 1. Well, another way to do that actually in the last tutorial could have just been index minus minus as well. So that's the same thing as saying index minus equals 1. And that's also the same thing as saying index minus index equals index minus 1. Just as this is the same thing as saying index, this is the same thing as saying index equals index plus 1. So just keep that in mind. Index plus plus, we're incrementing index by 1 each time the code inside this loop runs. And what I want to do is I want to say cout value indel. And what we'll do is we'll actually add 5 to value each time. So if we run this, you'll see we get 0, 5, 10, all the way up to 45 because this code is ran all the way until index equals 10, and each time this for loop is ran, index is getting incremented by 1. And when index equals 10, that means index is no longer less than 10, and the for loop jumps down here to return 0, and you get process return 0. So just to kind of show you a little bit more about it, let me actually take out value. We're going to output index is what we'll do instead, and you can actually see what happens to index throughout the for loop. We're going to hit run. Let me get rid of this real quick because it was still open. We're going to hit run, and you can see what happens to index as it goes through the loop. It goes from 0 all the way up to 9, and then the loop ends. So I want you to practice with this for loop, see how you can do different counting exercises and kind of cycle through numbers with this for loop. And even try changing this operator to index maybe greater than 10 and see how that changes it. Because obviously if we ran this right now, it wouldn't even run. It would just return because index starts at 0. So index is never actually greater than 10, so this code never runs. And also I want you to try, obviously we declared index right here, but what if we just said index equals to 0 and we changed this value? We said index right here equals 0. Or we just said int index. Then we don't have to put int right here. We can just write index and we can actually declare it like that.